Hello Chestnuts, this is our final learning journey lesson of the week and we're going to be doing a guided reading lesson today where you're going to be answering questions about a text. Obviously that text is Oliver and the Seawigs. We're going to be reading a little bit more of the story and finding out exactly what was in those glass baubles that we were looking at yesterday. To be successful in today's lesson, you need to listen to the text carefully, read questions carefully, scan for key information and copy the answers carefully. The first thing I'd like us to do is a little warm-up. So what I'd like you to do is look at the letter sequence below that I am going to show you now. I would like you to visualise it in your mind. Then, in a minute, I'm going to cover up the letters and you're going to answer the questions. You're not going to be able to peek because I'll reveal it to you in a minute. So have a little study. We've got B, C, F, D. You ready? Right. Think about what is the second letter? What is the last letter? And can you list the letters in reverse order? Let's see if you're right. The second letter was C, the last letter was D, and the letters in reverse order were D, F, C, B. That was just a little warm-up for you. We're going to have a look at another type of warm-up here because it's really important that when we read questions that we know what type of answer that we're looking for. So I've just got two sentences for you here. Captain James Cook discovered Australia in 1770. The ship he captained was called the Endeavour. Now, if you ask the question, who discovered Australia, we know that we're looking for a name. And names are types of proper nouns, so it's really important that we then scan for capital letters. If we look across, look, we've got capital letter there, there and there, so Captain James Cook. Then if I ask the question, when did he discover Australia? We would be looking for a date or time, so we'd be scanning for numbers. If I look along quickly, look, there's a number, and we'll work out if we read around the text that it was discovered in 1770. Finally, what was the name of the ship? Again, we're looking at a name, so we need to be scanning for capital letters. We've used these once before, right? We've got a capital letter there, but that's Australia, which isn't the name of the ship. We've got a capital letter there, but that's just the beginning of a sentence. And our final capital letter here is Endeavour, so that must be the name of the ship. So it's really important that we use different skills when we're scanning information to try and find the answers as quickly as possible, and that just helps us. So use those skills today. What we're going to do first is start by finding out who was in the glass baubles, and then we're going to read some more of the story. Oliver snatched his rucksack and ferreted inside it for his binoculars. He focused on one of those glassy danglers. The thing inside it was his mum. He yelped and swung the binoculars. There, inside the other globe, was Dad. The explorer seemed quite unharmed. Oliver began to jump up and down on the beach. He waved and shouted. When he looked through the binoculars again, he saw that his mum had spotted him. He saw his dad scribble something in his explorer's notebook and press it flat against the inside of his glass prison for Oliver to read. Help! Now his mother was scribbling too and pressing a note of her own to the glass. Stay away! But the Thurlestone was coming closer. Ignoring mean comments and backhanded compliments from the floating weed, it shouldered its way through the sea. Octopuses writhed their tentacles among its eyebrows, and a shark fell out of its nose like a fierce bogey. Up on its forehead a little platform had been built, and there stood a boy looking down. The Thurlestone was so close by then that Oliver didn't need his binoculars anymore. He could see the boy quite clearly without them. He was older than Oliver, a tall teenager balancing precariously on bean-sprout legs and about to tumble clumsily into adulthood. He wore sea boots and a sailor's uniform with all sorts of gold braid and medals and fancy finery all over it. When the gap of open water between Cliff and the Thurlestone had narrowed to a stone's throw, the Thurlestone stopped in a swirl of foam and spoke again. Want it? It said, staring at the water mole. Up on its brow, the boy picked up a big brass megaphone and bellowed through it. "My island wants that wreck of yours. You'd better hand it over." "Oh, oh, of all the cheek," squealed Iris. "We found it. It's ours." "You're not having my wig," rumbled Cliff. Oliver just cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Give me back my mum and dad." The other boy threw back his head and laughed. It was the sort of laugh that told you instantly he was not about to let poor Mr. and Mrs. Crisp go. "Ha ha ha," he cackled. "So they are yours, are they? Well, you should have taken better care of them. They make nice additions to the Thurlestone Seawig, don't you think? But not as nice as that fine submarine your island's found. Hand it over now, and spare yourself a lot of unpleasantness." "Who are you, anyway?" asked Iris. "You're very full of yourself." "My name," the boy said importantly, "is Stacey DeLacy." "But that's a girl's name," blurted Oliver. Stacey DeLacy's face turned a dark shade of red. "Silence!" he shouted. "Stacey is one of those names that can be for a boy or a girl, like Hilary or Leslie or, anyway, when the night of the Seawig rolls around, my Thurlestone should have the finest wig of all. That submarine is just the thing we need to top it off, and if you won't give it to us, we shall have to take it." "Mad," said Iris in an undertone. "Quite mad." Stacey DeLacy clapped his hands. "Come, my lovelies," he shouted, and laughed with wicked glee. So, now we have been introduced to a new character. What is your first impression of him and why? What do you think Stacey DeLacy's like? Is he a nice character? Is he a mean character? Just have a think for a moment. If you need to pause the video, you can do, and think about what he's like compared to Oliver. The impression I get of him is that he's quite confident, because he's obviously stood at the top of the Thurlestone, he's got his megaphone and he's shouting out orders. But I'm curious why it is that he's all on his own. Maybe we'll find out later in the story. Your task for today is going to be answering questions about the text. We're going to read a few more pages, and on each page you're going to have some questions to answer. So I'm going to read the questions first, just so you have them in your head. Page 81 says, find and copy 2 adjectives that describe Stacey's parents. Remember, an adjective is a describing word and it describes the noun. On page 82, I'd like you to answer the questions. Find and copy 2 items that Stacey saw washed up on the beach. What colour was the bulb of seaweed? And who did he imagine lashing with it? On page 84, I'd like you to answer the questions. What part of Stacey did the sea monkey bite? And the author wrote, the sea monkey cowered and crept away over the top of the rock. What do you think this suggests about how the sea monkey was feeling? On page 85, I'd like you to answer the questions. Why was Stacey impressed with the sea monkey? And why do you think Stacey felt encouraged by the monkey? And on page 86, how do you think Stacey felt when he realised there was a whole army of sea monkeys? And I'd like you to explain your answer. So let's continue reading. From the giant statues which grinned and gurned upon the Thurlestone's head, there came a rustling, a whispering, a scrabbling, a jostling, a strange, demented jabbering. No wonder Stacey DeLacy sounded gleeful. It was quite a new feeling for him, giving orders. When he'd been growing up, nobody had ever taken much notice of him. His parents, who were rich and busy, barely paid him any attention. The other children at school all hated him. And why did they hate him? Well, actually, it was because he was a nasty, boastful bully. But Stacey didn't realise that. He was sure it was just because of his name. Stacey can be a boy's name too, he would tell them, when they laughed at it. They never believed him. Angry and alone, he took long walks on the beach near his house, dreaming of the terrible revenge he would take on them all when he was older. All sorts of things washed up on that beach. As Stacey DeLacy strode along with his hands in his pockets, he was forever kicking aside old flip-flops, fishermen's floats, and plastic bottles with mysterious foreign labels. One day, after a storm, he found the shingle covered with stinking seaweed, uprooted from some deep hollow of the seabed. It was a type of seaweed that he had never noticed before. It had thick stalks, each as tall as Stacey, with a fat green bulb at the top. Stacey picked up one of the stalks and began cracking it like a bullwhip as he stomped along. He imagined lashing his classmates with it. "Stacey is not a girl's name," he shouted. Crack. "You'll be sorry when I'm famous and powerful," he yelled. Crack. "Just you wait," he hollered. "One day I'll..." Crack, squelch, splat. The green bulb at the end of the sea whip burst, and out came a splurt of dirty water, and something else. Something that moved, scrabbling and burrowing its way down into the tangles of dead weed that were heaped along the tide line. Stacey went closer and prodded the weed piles with his toe. Something was definitely rustling around in there. He bent down for a closer look. Suddenly the weed was torn aside and a hideous little fanged and grinning face stared up at him. Then 2 little webbed-fingered hands seized the toe of his sneaker and the creature sank its teeth into the rubber. "Wow!" shouted Stacey DeLacy, doing a triple backward somersault in his surprise. The creature flew off his shoe. By the time he had clambered up and dusted the sand out of his eyes, it was crouching on a nearby rock, watching him. It looked like an ugly little monkey with webbed hands and feet and greasy green fur. "Get lost!" he yelled angrily. The sea monkey cowered and crept away over the top of the rock out of sight. Stacey was impressed. He wasn't used to people doing what he told them. "Come back!" he shouted. The monkey reappeared. "My name is Stacey DeLacy," he said, and watched the monkey suspiciously. It didn't laugh. It didn't even giggle. "Stacey is not a girl's name," he said. Still nothing. Feeling encouraged, he told it, "You're mine. You will do everything I say." The monkey drew itself to attention and saluted. If Stacey DeLacy had been a different sort of boy, he might have thought, "I found a friend." But Stacey had never really wanted friends, he thought. "I've found a servant." He looked around. All about him the beach was littered with whips of the strange weed, each with its sea-green bulb. Was there a monkey in every one? There must be loads of them, hundreds. He picked up a strand and squeezed the bulb till it popped like a spot. Out tumbled another monkey. Excitedly, he popped another, and then another. "Help me!" he ordered the chittering, jittering monkeys, and they ran with him along the tide line, squeezing and popping, until a whole army of sea monkeys was scuttling behind him. Right, so we've learnt quite a lot about the story here, and these sea monkeys have appeared. So that will link to why there were monkeys on the front cover. Just in case you're not sure, sea monkeys are actually a real thing, but the ones in the book are fictional and invented by the author. This here, which is bladderwrack, is what the author has described as what the monkeys pop out from. So you'll see these little dots around, and that's what he's popping like a spot for the monkeys to come out of. But this is what they look like. They're described as an ugly monkey with webbed hands and feet and greasy green fur, chittering, jittering, stinky and repulsive looking, wicked, wary eyes, small and smelly, scary and dangerous looking, and they have snot green fur. Okay, so the author describes them as quite scary looking creatures. So just recapping to the questions that we're going to be looking at, and I will put these up on the class story so you can access them. On page 81, you're finding and copying 2 adjectives that describe Stacey's parents. On page 82, you're finding and copying 2 items that Stacey saw washed up on the beach. You're answering what colour was the bulb with the seaweed and who did he imagine lashing with it. On page 84, you're answering what part of Stacey did the sea monkey bite. And the author wrote the sea monkey cowered and crept away over the top of the rock. What does this suggest about how the sea monkey was feeling? You'll see I've highlighted coward there because I think you might want to use a dictionary to find the meaning of that word first. because it's really important when we answer questions that we understand what all the words mean. On page 85, why was Stacey impressed with the sea monkey? And why do you think Stacey felt encouraged by the monkey? And on page 86, how do you think Stacey felt when he realised there was a whole army of sea monkeys? And then you're going to explain your answer. So I think this is quite an exciting lesson today because we get to really focus on what we've understood from the story. I will put the answers up on Dojo for you later on in the day. And when I do that, I want you to think about which questions had an answer that you could copy straight from the text and which required ideas of your own. A question where you can copy from the text is called a retrieval question, and a question where you have to work out the answers from the clues is called an inference question. And we're going to be using that language a little bit more over the next few weeks. So if you need to, look back through this video and you can listen to me reading the story again, but I'll also put the text up on Dojo for you to be able to read yourself as well. I hope you look forward to doing this lesson and I look forward to seeing your answers. Bye, chestnuts.